Hello everybody, how are you doing? So I'm going to do something slightly different this week, but it is actually connected to the wider areas of my academic research and my commentary on kind of social and political institutions in the UK. So I'm going to be talking about my sober journey and sobriety, and I thought I'd start a subcategory on my blog where I discuss some of these issues and how they kind of feed in to the wider claims that I make about being much more in tune with my environment. So the blog is called Sober Talk, The Politics of Fun, written at with for Pattaya 2025. When I first became sober 11 years ago, the line I heard most often from old drinking companions was, "You used to be so much fun." At first, I honestly believed them. Yes, I used to be fun. I'd been a spirited drunk, the first on the dance floor, the man who could stretch a mildly amusing anecdote into a raucous tale of comedic exaggeration. There I was, the very embodiment of a boozy raconteur, fun distilled into human form. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth was, I was deeply unhappy. I used revelry as a way to mask the creeping recognition of malignant trauma. I believed that fun was performance, the loud laugh, the daring dare, the clever comeback. Fun was something manufactured, something flung outward as distraction. It wasn't until I stopped drinking that I recognized just how much emotional labor had gone into appearing fun and how little joy I had actually experienced. Just going to interject there. Now, my experience of sobriety is not the experience of sobriety. And I just want to say, many people have a very healthy relationship to alcohol. I personally don't, and I'll get into that later on. Back to the blog. In day-to-day life, sobriety gets interpreted as accusation. People don't tend to hear, "I don't drink." They hear, "I disapprove of your drinking." They don't hear choice, they hear judgment. How do we talk about things that aren't conventionally regarded as fun without sounding like pious pricks? And I think that's important to expand upon there, because that is something I've noticed over the 11 years almost all the time, particularly in the UK, where almost every single social situation involves some form of alcohol consumption. And I don't set out to go into a social situation and say, "Oh, I'm sober." But invariably it comes up almost every day. And so you find yourself constantly having to out yourself as sober. And what happens is people don't hear that you've made a choice not to drink. What they hear is you're commenting on their drinking. People tend to just quite often say to me, when they find out I'm not drinking, they'll say something like, "Oh, well, I don't drink very often these days." And it's like, okay, I literally don't care whether or not, you are happily out there on Friday and Saturday nights boozing all the time and doing whatever you want to do. It's nothing to do with me. My choice is that it wasn't working for me. And I was an alcoholic for decades and it didn't sit well with me, Anyway, back to the blog. Here's something I've slowly come to understand. The politics of fun is fundamentally about not noticing. I'm not just talking about drunk fun either. So much fun is learning how to switch off noticing certain things. It's a conspiracy of selective blindness. Alcohol helped me blur the boring, soften the painful, and gloss over the inconvenient. Sobriety, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. Sobriety is noticing, often against your will. When I stopped drinking, the world sharpened. I suddenly noticed that A&E departments weren't mysteriously chaotic on Saturday nights. They were flooded with intoxicated people who had fallen, crashed, or fought. I noticed that many of the people I had grown up with, perfectly average social drinkers, might more honestly be described as functioning alcoholics. I noticed how many relationships quietly revolved around the highs and lows of alcohol use. I noticed that behind many of the funniest people I knew lurked deep wells of avoidance, anxiety, grief, and violence. Alcohol was the soft focus filter on reality. By removing it, reality became uncomfortably clear. I'm just going to interject there just by saying, like I said, many people have healthy relationships with alcohol. I did not. But also, I would like to just point out that even if you are a social drinker, quite often alcohol stays in the system for a long time. So you tend to see people who don't think they're alcoholics necessarily. They're usually either in a state of hangover or drunkenness, and even when they're not drinking, alcohol is still affecting how they interact with the world, right? And yeah, as soon as I stepped away from all of that, I noticed just how clear I saw things, and it was really quite profound, because I suddenly realized not just how drunk people act, but how I was acting when I was drunk. So it was very, very an really intense moment, which I get into a bit later on. Anyway, back to the blog. This great noticing I've been continuing to experience has not been limited to the effects of substance misuse. No, it has affected me on a profoundly personal and political level. I started to notice that most of the things we buy or use are mined, farmed, or produced by an invisible underclass of peasants. That's not fun. I started to notice that so much of the world is actually built by slave or exploited labour. That's not fun either. I also started to notice endless war machines producing millions of displaced people wandering the world looking for sanctuary. So I volunteered to work in refugee camps. That, my friends, is definitely not fun. I'll just interject there and just sort of say, I think something to underscore here is I was inspired to start this section of my blog by coming here to Pattaya. Now, I have a very strange relationship to Pattaya. I first came here 10 years ago and lasted less than 24 hours. I just really didn't like the place. And my friends in Thailand had said to me, go to Pattaya, it's really changed now, it's very boutique, it's very bougie, la 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 la, it's not the same as it was. So I came again, and I was walking around and just noticing, actually, a lot of what made me dislike it so much is still here. For those who don't know, I think Pattaya boomed in the 60s and the 70s as basically a kind of huge brothel for the American military during the Vietnam War. And so, there was kind of sexploitation on a mass scale here. And I think that continues to this day. And because it's so evident and it's so apparent to me just walking around, again, no judgments here, because I've probably been not aware of certain situations I've been either, but now because I'm hyper aware and sensitive to that, it's kind of very noticeable to me, if that makes sense. Anyway, so what can we do? You can't just demand that everyone stops having fun any more than you can dictate what is or isn't fun. I don't have the answer. The problem is, so much of life for so many people just isn't fun. In order to have fun, you have to not notice the trafficked people building your wellness holiday retreat or serving your wine. You have to not notice that the economic heart of so much fun is that someone somewhere is losing out. Just to interject there as well, I don't think it's just about alcohol consumption either. I think there's a great, whenever you're kind of so much of the political systems and the economic systems are internationally linked, and someone somewhere is being exploited for that, whether it's this kind of tech that I'm using or the phone that you have or whatever. You're kind of, in a way, to sort of enjoy yourself, to have fun, to not think about those things, you have to kind of switch off, right, to kind of the reality. Whereas in somewhere like Southeast Asia, it's quite more difficult to do that because you're faced with the reality right here. You know, there is this kind of huge underclass that you see every day, usually from Laos, from Myanmar, places like that, of just kind of underpaid, exploited workers that build everything, you know, and it's kind of here. And again, most people don't tend to notice it because when they do come to places like this, they're on holiday. Like I was invited when I was in North Thailand to go to a yoga retreat, and I thought, oh, that sounds quite nice, I might go to a yoga retreat. And the person was like this really lovely hippie girl, and she was just like, yeah, no, it's really great, it's really peaceful. Oh, and it's run by this charity, like, of, you know, they're really kind of helping, you know, IDF soldiers get over their trauma. And I was just suddenly like, how can you be into yoga and mindfulness and just go and spend a week with the IDF? It just blows my mind. But anyway, again, it's not just drunk people. There's this like collective not noticing things. And I think that's what I wanted to highlight here. Anyway, now, before anyone feels judged, let me be clear. I don't care what people choose to do with their bodies, their evenings, or their holidays. I don't hold some puritanical moral high ground. I don't deliver sermons. I'm not the ghost of Christmas temperance. I choose sobriety because I like it. I like noticing things. It suits me. Just to interject there, one of the reasons I never did AA is because of the religious undertones to those kind of things. And I didn't want to sermonize my sobriety. I literally, you know, that would feel like the ultimate hypocrisy to me. You know, I literally don't care what people drink or put into their bodies, but I'm just kind of more interested in my own journey of understanding and noticing the world around me and the environment I live in. Okay, back to the blog. I've been trying to balance noticing with fun and believe that I'm much more fun now than I was as a drunken jester. My attention is real. My presence is not performance. Unfortunately, some of my former drinking buddies disagree, chiefly because I no longer serve a supporting cast in the theatre of their intoxication. But that's just the way it is now. I can't go back to not noticing. It's actually really challenging for me to live in the UK, given that so much of UK life revolves around substance misuse and existing in a state of not noticing. Fun now, for me, is clarity. It's noticing. It's connection. It's feeling it all rather than numbing it away. And if that makes me no fun to the still blurred, then so be it. I'd rather notice. As always, Miath Kar. And I think that final paragraph really ties it all back into my other work as well. My academic work, being aware of my environment, and my social political critiques on things like foreign policy in and how it's reported to people in the Western world and the UK. I can't stress this enough. I think when I go back to Western countries, people are the most deluded about the reality of certain situations around the world. They are the most ill-informed people, and that's by design. And that kind of breaks my brain a bit. And I don't know how to sit with that. And I'm still trying to figure it out. But also, you know, on a very personal level, so much, like I said, of the work that I did in the UK revolves around this idea of being drunk, or you know, booze is very much kind of a part of the cultural fabric there. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how I fit in there anymore, or how I make it work there. It's causing me a huge amount of distress every time I go back. Just because, not because of individual people, and I don't hate anybody and I don't judge anybody for not understanding or not knowing some of the things I've seen or I'm talking about. But it's shocking. You know, when I've worked in the UK, I've had conversations with people who, you know, lecture me about the Middle East or about Southeast Asia or about East Asia. And it's incredible just how ill-informed or misinformed they are. And I used to work in media in London, and I had quite a lot of friends there who coincidentally are also still boozy people. And, I have conversations with them privately, and that's stopped, obviously. But it's like, how can you not notice these things and not report on them honestly? How can you take money specifically lying to everyone in Britain? Because I do think that's what's happening. In order to exist in the UK, you just have to not notice what all of the institutions are in London. And I don't know how to get my head around that. Anyway, trying to leave you on an upbeat note. I hope you're really well and you have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. Anyway, as always, miath ka. Bye.